Far beyond the stars, the galaxy whispered about the Vare Dominion. They were an old empire, ancient in power, cruel in history. Many races had once stood against them, and many had fallen. To most, the Vare were not just rulers, they were nightmares made of steel and fire. And now, their eyes had turned toward Earth. Humanity was young compared to the great empires. They had only stepped into the galaxy a short while ago. Their fleets were new, their colonies few, and their weapons still untested against the oldest powers of space. The Vare Dominion believed it would be easy to crush them. To the Vare, humanity was nothing more than another species to test, another weak race to put back in place. But humanity was not afraid. Not yet. The Terran High Command gathered in silence inside a dark chamber on Earth. Holograms of alien fleets glowed above the table, their outlines sharp and deadly. The Vare had sent a challenge, an announcement to the galaxy itself. Humanity would face a trial of strength. A test. If they failed, Earth would burn. If they survived, they might win respect. The leaders of Earth knew it was more than a game. This was not just about honor. This was about survival. The Terran fleet stood ready, engines burning, soldiers waiting in silence. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew the Vare ships were larger, faster, and deadlier. But in the heart of every human was something the Vare did not understand. A refusal to kneel. On the borders of the solar system, near the cold dark of Neptune, the first Terran ships lined up in formation. Their hulls were sharp, built with earth steel and human hands. Each captain stared at the stars, waiting for the enemy. They knew this was not only a battle, but a message to the galaxy. The Vare Dominion wanted to humiliate them in front of all. Billions across distant worlds were watching, waiting to see if the new species called humans would break. The first signs of the Vare fleet appeared like shadows in the void. Massive ships emerged from warp, each one larger than a Terran city. Their hulls glowed with alien energy, symbols of their empire painted across the sides. Compared to them, the human fleet looked small, fragile, almost laughable. The Vare commander sent a message across the void, his voice cold and filled with pride. Humans, today we measure your worth. You will fight and you will fail. Your fleet is a candle before a storm. But the Terran admiral did not flinch. His voice was steady as he answered, "We are not here to be measured. We are here to endure." Silence followed. For the first time in years, an empire that had never been challenged felt the weight of defiance. On Earth, billions watched the transmission, their hearts racing. Families held hands, soldiers whispered prayers, leaders kept their faces calm though fear burned in their eyes. If the fleet failed, Earth would be open to fire. Cities would fall. Humanity itself would be erased. But still, no one looked away. The first moments of the test began. Vare ships spread out, moving like predators around smaller prey. Their weapons glowed, charging with alien energy. They expected fear, retreat, surrender. But the Terran fleet did not move back. They stood firm, waiting. A voice inside every human heart said the same thing: do not break. In the flagship, Admiral Rains studied the enemy lines. His crew waited for his orders, their hands steady over the controls. He did not see weakness in his officers. He saw fire. Humanity had always been underestimated. In history, great powers had called them weak, primitive, unworthy. But humans had survived every storm, every war, every empire that thought itself eternal. This time would be no different. The Vare commander gave the signal, and alien weapons lit the void. Beams of energy cut through the darkness, heading straight for the Terran fleet. The first test had begun. In that moment, as fire lit the stars, the galaxy held its breath. Would humanity fall in its first true trial? Or would they rise in a way no empire could ever predict? The answer was about to shake the stars themselves. On Earth, the world held its breath. The message of the Vare Dominion echoed through every channel, every screen, every voice. Humanity will be tested. People in great cities and small towns stared at the sky with the same question burning in their hearts. Could the Terran fleet stand against the most feared empire in the galaxy? In the crowded streets of New Shanghai, children pointed at the giant screens showing the enemy ships gathering near Neptune. In the markets of Africa, workers stopped their hands and looked upward, as if they could see the battle waiting in the stars. In North America, old veterans of Earth's wars sat in silence, remembering a time when survival was always uncertain. Around the globe, billions felt the same fear. Humanity was small, and the Vair were mighty. In the halls of government, leaders argued in whispers. Some said the fleet should retreat, surrender, and save the planet from destruction. Others said honor demanded a fight, even if defeat was certain. But there was no time left for debate. The Vair had already arrived. The Terran fleet was already in position. What happened next would decide everything. Inside the flagship Resolute, Admiral Rains stood at the center of the bridge. His officers looked to him for strength, and he gave them none of his fear. His face was calm, his voice steady, but deep inside he knew the truth. They were outnumbered, perhaps 10-1. The Vair ships carried weapons that no human eye had ever seen in battle. Their armor was thick with centuries of alien design. And yet, humanity was still standing. Rains knew he carried the weight of Earth on his shoulders. If he failed, there would be no second chance. Families on Earth watched the live feed with trembling hands. In one small home in Brazil, a mother held her 2 children close, whispering that their father was out there, inside one of those ships. In a distant mining colony on Mars, workers gathered in silence, their faces covered with dust, as they stared at the broadcast. They knew if the fleet failed, their colony would be destroyed as easily as Earth itself. But fear was not the only thing that filled humanity. Alongside fear was pride, a strange and stubborn pride that refused to break. Soldiers inside the fleet checked their weapons, their systems, and their suits. Some prayed quietly. Others wrote last messages for families they might never see again. None of them ran. They knew what was coming, and still they waited with fire in their eyes. Across the galaxy, other species tuned in. The smaller empires, long oppressed by the Vair, watched with curiosity. Could these new humans, so young, so inexperienced, do what none had done before? The older empires, who respected only strength, laughed in silence. To them, this was a spectacle, a show before the execution. But in every corner of the galaxy, eyes stayed fixed on the Terran fleet. The test had become more than a trial. It had become a story of defiance. On the bridge of a Vair battleship, Commander Zyler sneered as he looked at the small human fleet. "They are fragile," he said to his officers. "They do not understand what stands before them. This will be short." His crew laughed, their voices cold and cruel. To them, humans were insects pretending to be warriors. They had seen countless races break before the Dominion. Why should this time be different? And yet, deep in the heart of every human, there was something the Vair did not see. Humanity had known fear since the beginning of its history. On Earth, they had faced famine, plague, war, and death. They had learned to survive storms, to rebuild from ashes, to fight with nothing but stones in their hands. That history lived inside every soldier now standing in the Terran fleet. Admiral Rains looked at his officers one more time. "Remember," he said, his voice low but firm. "The galaxy is watching. Show them what it means to be human." His words carried across the ship, and then across the fleet. Every captain repeated the same command to their crews. No one would run. No one would bow. The Vair might have numbers. They might have power. But humans had something else. A will that refused to break. Back on Earth, the fear did not vanish, but it changed. People who had been trembling now raised their heads. They saw their fleet standing firm, and hope lit inside them like a spark in the dark. The battle had not yet begun, but already the test had grown into something greater. It was no longer only about survival. It was about identity. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity was not a weak species, not a passing shadow in history. They were here, they were rising, and they would fight. In the skies above Neptune, the alien ships moved closer, their weapons glowing with deadly light. The silence before the storm pressed down on every heart, both on Earth and across the stars. And then, with a single command, the test became war. The blackness of space near Neptune turned into fire as the first shot was fired. A beam of energy from a Vare battleship cut across the void, faster than thought, aimed at a small Terran destroyer. The beam struck with blinding light, but the destroyer held. Its shields burned and cracked, sparks danced across its hull, yet it did not fall. Inside the bridge, officers shouted warnings, but the captain's voice was calm. "Hold the line. Return fire." A moment later, human weapons answered. Blue streaks of plasma and missile trails crossed the darkness. They struck against the massive Vare cruiser, shaking it, forcing its shields to flare. It was not destroyed, but the galaxy saw something no one expected. Humans could hit back. On the Vare command ship, Commander Zyler's eyes narrowed. He had thought the first strike would scatter them like dust, but the Terran fleet had not moved. They had stood firm, and they had fired back with precision. He turned to his second-in-command, his voice sharp. "They have spirit. Break it." At once, more Vare ships moved, forming a spear of steel aimed at the human line. Alien cannons lit up, filling the darkness with deadly fire. The void shook with explosions, and the smaller Terran ships weaved desperately to avoid destruction. One corvette was torn apart, breaking into fire and fragments. On Earth, millions cried out in horror as they saw it happen on their screens. But the line did not collapse. The Terran admiral gave a single command, his voice carrying across the fleet. "Pattern Delta. Now." At once, the human formation shifted. The larger cruisers moved forward, shields overlapping, forming a wall of defense. Behind them, the smaller destroyers darted through gaps, striking at weak points in the alien spear. Missiles screamed across the dark, slipping through the openings in the Vare shields. Explosions rippled across two enemy ships, shaking them violently. The galaxy watching gasped in silence. No one had seen such tactics before. Humans were not stronger. They were not larger. But they moved with something the Vare did not understand: coordination, creativity, and courage. Inside the Terran flagship, Admiral Raines watched the enemy carefully. His mind was calm, his voice steady, but his thoughts were sharp. He knew brute force would not win this fight. He knew cunning would be their weapon. He leaned toward his officers. "They underestimate us. Let's use it." And so, the trap began. The human fleet pretended to retreat, pulling back slowly, firing as they moved. The Vare commander sneered, believing victory was close. His ships surged forward, chasing the retreating Terrans. But the humans were not running. They were leading. At the signal, hidden Terran ships uncloaked from the shadows of Neptune's rings. They had been waiting in silence, engines cold, like hunters waiting for prey. Now they struck. From behind, they launched a wave of missiles that slammed into the rear of the Vare formation. Explosions shook the massive cruisers, tearing through armor and breaking the perfect spear. Chaos filled the alien fleet. On the Vare command bridge, alarms rang. Officers shouted in panic. Commander Zyler roared in rage, his pride wounded. He had been outmaneuvered by a species he considered children. Across the galaxy, voices rose. In cantinas, in marketplaces, in shadowed empires, beings stared at their screens in disbelief. Humanity had not only survived the first clash. They had struck back with cleverness that no one expected. Still, the battle was far from over. The Vare ships turned with fury, hammering the Terran fleet with fire. One human cruiser took a direct hit, its shields collapsing, its hull torn open. Hundreds of brave souls inside were lost in the silence of space. Another destroyer vanished in a blaze of light, broken apart by enemy fire. On Earth, the people mourned as they watched, but they also cheered. For every loss, there was defiance. For every fallen ship, another struck back harder. Humanity was bleeding, but they were not broken. The battle dragged on, each second carrying the weight of history. Every move was broadcast across the stars, every shot a message. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would not run. And as the smoke of burning ships filled the black sky, one truth became clear. The Vare Dominion had started a test, but they had unleashed something far greater. In the middle of fire and destruction, humanity was proving itself. And the galaxy was watching with wide, silent eyes. Admiral Raines stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute, his eyes fixed on the storm of battle outside. Fire and wreckage floated across the void, human and alien alike. The Vare fleet pressed harder, their cannons blazing, their commanders furious at being tricked in the first clash. Yet, even as the enemy advanced, Raines did not lose control. He had been waiting for this moment. Deep inside the heart of the Terran fleet was a secret plan, a plan built not on size or power, but on something far older, human history. Long before humanity touched the stars, they had fought countless wars on Earth. From ancient soldiers with shields and swords, to modern armies with tanks and aircraft, humans had learned the art of survival against stronger enemies. They had faced empires before. They had faced conquerors before. And they had always found a way to endure. Now, those lessons lived again, hidden inside the orders of the Terran High Command. The Vare expected raw strength. They expected numbers and firepower. They expected humans to fight as others had fought, straight and predictable. But humans did not fight like machines. They fought with imagination. They fought with tricks. They fought with desperation turned into strategy. Weeks before the battle, while the galaxy still doubted humanity, scientists and admirals worked in silence. They studied the Vare's past battles, every move, every tactic, every pattern. They learned how the Empire crushed weaker foes, how they always struck from above, how they forced their enemies into predictable traps. And then, the humans asked themselves a single question: what if we refuse to play their game? On Mars, engineers designed new weapons, not stronger than the Vare, but sharper, faster, more precise. Missiles that could hide their trail until the last moment. Drones that could scatter signals and confuse alien sensors. Energy torpedoes that bent around shields using strange physics discovered by human scientists. On Earth, old generals remembered the wars of the past. They taught young commanders the power of deception, the art of ambush, the strength of fighting in unexpected ways. Humanity would not meet the Vare with brute force. They would bleed them with cunning. Admiral Raines carried these secrets in his mind as he watched the battle unfold. Already, the first trap had worked. The Vare's spear formation had been broken by hidden ships. But that was only the beginning. The real plan had layers, like a puzzle hidden inside the stars. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Hayes. Signal the fleet. Prepare for Phase 2. Hayes nodded, her hands moving across the console. Across the Terran line, captains received the coded orders. Engines shifted, weapons armed, drones deployed. Slowly, without the enemy noticing, the humans reshaped the battlefield. The Vare commander, still blinded by rage, pushed his ships forward, desperate to crush the defiant humans. His pride demanded victory, and pride made him blind. He did not see that every move he made pulled him deeper into the human design. On Earth, the public did not know of the hidden plan. They only saw fire and loss. Families cried for the ships already destroyed, leaders whispered prayers, and children clung to parents, asking if Earth would still be there tomorrow. The fear was heavy, but in the military chambers of high command, the old generals leaned forward. They recognized something in the fleet's movements, something familiar. Humanity's history was alive in those patterns. Guerrilla war. Ambush. Feints and traps. Strategies once used on Earth's battlefields now reborn among the stars. They are teaching the galaxy how we fight, one general whispered. Not with size. Not with fear. With wit. Back in space, the trap was nearly ready. Small Terran ships darted across the battlefield, drawing enemy fire, pretending to falter. Vare warships followed, hungry for easy kills. But as they gave chase, their formation stretched, their unity broke apart. Admiral Rains watched silently, waiting for the perfect moment. His crew trusted him. They knew something greater was coming. Finally, the time arrived. His voice cut through the bridge. All units, strike now. At once, hidden Terran weapons came alive. Swarms of drones burst from launch bays, scattering across the battlefield. Their signals painted false targets, confusing Vare sensors. Missiles slipped through the chaos, striking at engines and weapon mounts. Plasma fire rained from the flanks as human ships appeared where the enemy least expected. The Vare formation collapsed into confusion. Their commander shouted for order, but his commands fell into chaos as ships crashed into one another, blinded by false readings. For the first time in centuries, the mighty empire tasted real uncertainty. And the galaxy saw it. Billions of eyes widened as the impossible happened. Humanity, small and fragile, had turned the battle into a game of shadows, and the empire could not keep up. Admiral Rains stood tall, his gaze cold and sharp. "Let the galaxy know," he said softly. "This is how humans answer." The hidden plan was no longer hidden. It was alive, and it had only just begun. The void burned with light as the Terran plan unfolded. Human ships moved like wolves around giants, striking from angles the Vare did not expect. Drones scattered, missiles screamed, and plasma fire ripped through the black. The proud formation of the Vare fleet was no longer a wall of power. It was a storm of confusion. For the first time, the empire that had crushed countless races felt something it had not known in centuries: doubt. On the Vare command ship, Commander Zyler's voice thundered across his bridge. "Hold the line. Crush them. They are nothing but insects." His officers scrambled to obey, but fear touched their eyes. This was not how battles with weak races went. Usually, the enemy broke within minutes. Usually, the cries of surrender filled the comms. But these humans were different. They did not beg. They did not retreat. They attacked with a fire that grew stronger the more they bled. On Earth, the world watched in shock. Screens across cities showed the impossible: Vare ships taking damage, their shields cracking, their engines failing. In New Europa colony, children cheered every time a human missile found its mark. In Africa, old veterans shook their heads in awe. "We have seen this before," one whispered. "This is the same spirit that carried us through every war in history." Humanity's pride, once silent, began to rise. They were not just surviving. They were fighting back. In the chaos, one Terran destroyer, Vigilant, made a daring move. Surrounded by 3 enemy cruisers, its captain ordered full power to engines. The ship darted close, weaving between cannon fire, until it was nearly on top of the enemy. Then, with a final command, it launched its entire payload of missiles at point-blank range. The blast shook the void, tearing 2 Vare cruisers apart in an explosion so bright it blinded sensors. The Vigilant was lost, ripped to pieces by return fire, but its sacrifice burned a hole in the Empire's pride. Across the fleet, human crews saw it happen and their hearts blazed with fury. They shouted across comms, their voices filled with fire. "For Vigilant! For Earth!" The galaxy heard their cries, carried on the open channels. Small, fragile humans roaring defiance against giants. For the Vare, it was unthinkable. Commander Zyler slammed his fist on the console. "Fools! Crush them now!" He ordered reinforcements forward, but the trap was already set. Admiral Rains watched calmly from the Resolute. His voice was steady. "Phase 3. Collapse their wings." At once, Terran cruisers moved into position, their fire concentrating on the outer ships of the Vare formation. Missiles curved through space, guided by human ingenuity, slipping past defenses. One by one, the wings of the enemy broke, their ships drifting apart. The Vare fleet lost its shape, its strength scattered. On distant worlds, other species stared in silence. The mighty Dominion was stumbling, and it was stumbling because of humans. In the Senate of a neutral empire, alien leaders whispered nervously, "If they can wound the Vare, what else can they do?" In the hidden camps of oppressed races, hope flickered for the first time in generations. Perhaps the Empire was not untouchable after all. Still, the battle was not without cost. Human ships burned. Hulls split open. Brave men and women gave their lives in silence, their sacrifices buying every inch of ground. The Terran fleet was bloodied, but it refused to bow. The harder the Vaer struck, the more humans resisted. Each loss became a rallying cry. Each death became fuel for survival. Commander Zyler's pride twisted into rage. He had never been challenged like this. His name was feared across the galaxy. He had ended countless rebellions. But now, against a young race with only a handful of colonies, he was being humiliated. His pride screamed for victory. And pride made him reckless. "All ships," he shouted. "Full power. Break them, or die." His armada surged forward in a storm of fire. But the humans had been waiting for this. Admiral Rains whispered his final order. "Now, show them." From behind Neptune's shadow, the last piece of the Terran plan revealed itself. A hidden group of heavy cruisers, armed with the newest human weapons, burst into the battlefield. Their cannons fired at once, unleashing energy that bent through Vaer shields. Explosions tore across the enemy's forward line. Engines died, hulls cracked, and in seconds the mighty spear of the Vaer fleet shattered completely. Silence followed for a heartbeat. And then the galaxy roared. Humanity had not only survived. They had broken the Empire's pride. On Earth, cheers shook the cities. People hugged strangers, tears of joy falling down their faces. For the first time, they believed victory was possible. For the first time, the galaxy believed the unthinkable. The Vaer Dominion could be challenged. On his ship, Admiral Rains stood tall. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "Let this day be remembered. Humanity does not kneel. The battle was not finished. The war was not over. But pride, the strongest weapon of the Vaer, had been shattered. And in its place, fear began to grow. The battlefield near Neptune was no longer silent black space. It was a storm of fire and wreckage, a graveyard of ships both human and alien. Flames and twisted metal floated like ghosts in the void. The Terran fleet, though bloodied and broken in places, still held the line. The Vaer Dominion, proud and ancient, had been pushed back further than anyone thought possible. But the war was not yet won. The Vaer commander, Zyler, stood on his bridge with his pride wounded and his fury burning. He had sworn that humans would be crushed quickly, but now he stared at screens showing his damaged fleet. Entire wings were gone, shields shattered, cruisers drifting helplessly. His voice growled low, filled with venom. "Enough of this. Prepare the heavy cannons." His officers hesitated. The heavy cannons were weapons rarely used, for they consumed enormous energy and left ships vulnerable afterward. But pride left no room for caution. At his command, massive Vaer ships began charging their superweapons, lights glowing across their hulls like the heartbeat of a dying star. On the human side, Admiral Rains saw the danger immediately. His eyes narrowed as he studied the strange energy patterns. He turned to his officers. "They are preparing something powerful. Stronger than anything we've seen." The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what it meant. One strike from such weapons could erase entire groups of ships. Humanity's fragile line might collapse in moments. Yet, Rains did not show fear. He leaned forward, his voice calm. "Then we must turn their weapon into their weakness." Across the fleet, human crews braced themselves. Engineers rerouted power to shields. Pilots whispered last words to their ships. Soldiers gripped their controls as if holding the hands of their families far away on Earth. The Vaer weapons fired. Great beams of light, wider than cities, tore through the void. A Terran cruiser vanished instantly, broken apart into dust and flame. Another beam carved across the line, destroying two smaller destroyers with a single strike. The Earth shook with grief as the images streamed to billions. People cried, screamed, even cursed the sky. But then, something unexpected happened. The Terran fleet did not fall apart. Instead, their formation shifted, almost as if they had been waiting for this very moment. Admiral Rains gave the signal. Execute the shadow net. At once, hidden drones activated, scattering waves of false signals across the battlefield. Their targeting systems blinked with confusion. Their sensors saw dozens of ghost fleets, phantom ships moving in every direction. The giant cannons fired again, but the beams cut only through illusions. The human ships had already moved. Gasps rose across the galaxy as the mighty Veer superweapons struck nothing but empty space. The trap was working. The Terran fleet moved in small, sharp groups, striking and vanishing like shadows. Missiles curved through the darkness, plasma fire burned holes in enemy armor, and once again the Empire's pride became its downfall. Commander Xyler roared in rage, his voice shaking the walls of his command ship. Impossible! They are tricking us like children. Find them. Destroy them. But the more he demanded order, the more chaos spread. Veer ships collided as they chased phantoms. Their heavy cannons drained their power, leaving them open for counterattack. One by one, human ships found targets and delivered deadly blows. On Earth, the world erupted with hope. The first cries of despair turned into shouts of victory. Families who moments before had thought all was lost now raised their voices in joy. Humanity was proving it again. They would not kneel. Across the galaxy, whispers spread like wildfire. Smaller species, long crushed by the Dominion, sent secret messages to one another. Did you see? The humans stand. The humans fight. The humans hurt the Empire. Hope, a weapon the Veer had long buried, was waking again. Still, the cost was heavy. Human ships burned bright in the void. Brave men and women gave their lives in silence so that others could strike. Admiral Rains felt each loss like a wound in his heart, but he stood tall. He knew this was the price of survival, the price of freedom. And he also knew this was the turning point. Humanity was no longer the prey. They had become the hunters. As the Veer fleet struggled, Rains gave one last order for the day. His voice was steel. Push them back. Make them fear us. The Terran fleet surged forward, their smaller ships darting between giants, their fire tearing through enemy shields. The Empire, mighty and ancient, staggered under the assault of a young race that refused to die. The galaxy watched, stunned. The Veer Dominion, once untouchable, was bleeding in front of them. And for the first time in centuries, the impossible question was whispered across the stars. Could the Empire fall? The battlefield was a storm of fire and ruin. Wreckage drifted across the black, glowing with fading flames. Human and Veer ships alike floated broken, their crews lost to the silence of space. Yet through the chaos, the Terran fleet still stood. Smaller, bloodied, but unbroken. The galaxy watched in silence, billions of eyes fixed on the impossible sight. Humanity had endured the storm, and now it was time to answer. On the flagship Resolute, Admiral Rains stood tall, his uniform torn from the shaking of the ship, but his voice steady. "This is it," he said softly, though his crew heard every word. "We've held the line. Now we show them who we are." His officers nodded, fire in their eyes. They knew what it meant. The fleet had been on the defensive since the battle began, surviving strike after strike. But now, with the enemy staggering, it was time to strike back with everything they had. Across the human line, damaged ships powered up their weapons one more time. Engines roared, shields flickered, and wounded crews forced themselves to fight. Every captain gave the same order: no retreat. Push forward. On the Veer command ship, Commander Xyler's pride was torn apart. His fleet was in shambles, their mighty weapons wasted on illusions, their proud formations scattered. Yet his rage refused to admit defeat. "Crush them," he screamed. "We are the Dominion. We do not fall to insects." But his words sounded hollow. His officers hesitated. For the first time, fear had entered the hearts of the Empire's warriors. They had seen humans take the storm and rise from it stronger. They had seen them fight with fire and sacrifice. The illusion of invincibility was broken. Admiral Rains gave the signal. The Terran fleet surged forward as one. Small ships darted like knives, striking at exposed engines. Heavy cruisers unleashed broadside volleys, tearing holes in alien armor. Drones swarmed the battlefield, scattering signals and confusing the enemy further. Every move was precise, every strike carried meaning. It was not just a battle anymore. It was a declaration. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was answering. On Earth, every screen showed the moment. Families held each other, tears running down their faces as they saw their fleet charging forward. Children pointed with wide eyes, cheering as enemy ships burst into flame. In the great cities, people shouted from rooftops, chanting the same word, humanity. Humanity. On colonies across Mars, Europa, and Luna, workers dropped their tools and cried with pride. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors of a rising race. In distant star systems, oppressed species whispered in disbelief. The humans are winning. The humans fight the Empire. For them, hope spread like fire in dry grass. The Dominion's rule had seemed eternal, but now a crack had opened. Perhaps the impossible could happen. Perhaps the Empire could fall. The battle reached its height. A massive Vare battleship, larger than any human ship, pushed forward to break the Terran line. Its cannons blazed, cutting through one destroyer and crippling another. But before it could fire again, 3 human cruisers moved together. They circled the giant, firing non-stop, their weapons striking weak points again and again. The alien shields cracked, engines flared, and with one final volley the battleship erupted in a storm of fire. The explosion lit the void like a dying star. Across the galaxy, voices rose in shock. The Dominion had lost one of its greatest ships. Humanity had destroyed it. Commander Xyler stared at the flames, his pride shattered. He whispered in disbelief, "Impossible." But Admiral Rains did not whisper. His voice was loud, carried on every open channel, sent across the stars for all to hear. "We are not here to be measured. We are not here to kneel. We are here to survive. And we will endure." His words thundered into history. Across Earth and beyond, cheers shook the air. Humanity's answer was clear. They would not bow, not to the Dominion, not to any empire. They would fight until the stars themselves burned out. The Vare ships began to retreat, their once proud formation broken, their commanders desperate to escape the humiliation. Humanity had not only survived the test. They had turned it into a warning. In the silence after the retreat, the galaxy trembled with a new truth. Humanity was no longer a small race at the edge of the stars. Humanity had spoken, and its voice was strong. This was not the end of the war. It was only the beginning. And the answer humans had given would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. The great silence after the battle was louder than the clash of weapons. The Vare Dominion's mighty fleet had withdrawn, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and humiliation. For the first time in countless centuries, the Empire had tasted defeat at the hands of a younger race. The Terran fleet, though scarred and battered, floated victorious near Neptune. Wrecked ships still burned, and the cost was heavy, but humanity had endured. Across the stars, the galaxy whispered. On small worlds ruled by fear, hidden voices repeated the same message. The humans stood. The humans fought. The humans won. The Empire's fear had begun. On the Vare homeworld, deep within their Grand Council chamber, the rulers of the Dominion gathered. High towers cast shadows across the planet's surface, and banners of conquest hung heavy in the air. Yet inside the chamber, the mood was dark. Commanders spoke with sharp anger, their pride wounded. "How can this be?" one demanded. "They are primitives. They should have fallen in one strike." Another growled, "It is not possible. Something must have aided them." But silence fell when the oldest of the council spoke. His voice was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. No, this was no trick. The humans have shown us what they are. They are not like the others we have crushed. They do not break. The chamber shook with unease. For centuries the Dominion had ruled with fear. Their enemies always surrendered quickly, their hope destroyed before it could grow. But now, that old strategy was failing. The humans had not only resisted, they had made the Empire bleed. Fear spread in the hearts of the mighty, for they knew what came next. If other species saw weakness, rebellion would follow. Already, whispers grew in the dark corners of the galaxy. Small fleets tested the chains that bound them. Secret transmissions carried words of defiance. And at the center of it all stood humanity, the spark of a storm. On Earth, the victory was celebrated like no other moment in history. Cities erupted in light, fireworks painting the skies. Families who had watched their loved ones march into battle now held their heads high with pride. They mourned their dead, but they also knew the sacrifice had given birth to something greater. Humanity was no longer a silent race hidden at the edge of the stars. They were now a force the galaxy could not ignore. Admiral Raines stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his face tired, his body worn, but his eyes alive with fire. He looked at the wreckage drifting in the void, a graveyard of heroes. His voice was quiet, spoken only to his crew, but it carried weight beyond measure. This is only the beginning. The Empire will return, stronger and angrier. But we have shown them our answer. And now the galaxy knows. We will never kneel. His officers saluted, their hearts burning with pride. They knew the road ahead would be hard, but they also knew they were ready. In the shadows of distant stars, smaller species began to prepare. Secret armies formed, ships were built in hidden docks, and voices of rebellion grew louder. The humans had shown that the Dominion could bleed, and that was enough to light a fire no empire could control. On the Vaer command ship, Commander Xyler sat in silence, his pride shattered, his name stained by failure. He stared at the empty void and whispered, "They are dangerous. If they are not destroyed soon, they will destroy us." His words were carried back to the council, but even as they debated their next move, the truth had already spread. Fear had entered the heart of the Empire. The invincible Dominion had been wounded. The hunters had become the hunted. Across the galaxy, a question now burned brighter than any star. If humanity could stand against the Empire today, what would they become tomorrow? Some called them saviors, others called them a threat, but all agreed on one thing: humanity had changed the balance of power forever. The Terran fleet turned slowly toward home, carrying both victory and grief. Behind them, the wreckage of battle drifted as silent proof of what had been achieved. Ahead of them lay an uncertain future, filled with wars yet to come. But there was no fear in their hearts. Only resolve. The Empire would come again, with more fire, more ships, and more fury. But humanity was ready. Their answer had been spoken in fire and blood, and it echoed across the stars. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would rise. Humanity would endure. And in the shadows of the galaxy, where fear once ruled, hope now lived. The Dominion trembled, for they had awakened an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. Humanity was no longer a question. Humanity was the answer.